my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. If you're new to The Birth Hour, you may not know that we have an online childbirth course that is evidence-based. It includes 12 modules that take you from your final weeks of pregnancy through obviously preparing for birth and then postpartum and feeding your baby as well. And with enrollment in that course, which is called Know Your Options, you'll get free access to our other course called Beyond the First Latch, where we talk all about pumping, feeding baby, storing milk, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan, all of those things as well. Okay, so if you go to thebirthhour.com/course, you can see everything laid out in the course, module by module, as well as an FAQ section, which will hopefully answer some of your questions if you have any, things like how to get it covered by an FSA account and things like that. It also talks about the bonuses that come with the course, including bi-monthly Zoom calls and access to our private Facebook group. So again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. And you can use the coupon code 100OFF for $100 off enrollment as a podcast listener. We would also love to welcome you into our listener supporter group via Patreon. That's at patreon.com/birthhour. And by becoming a Patreon supporter, you get access to all of our archived episodes. This podcast launched in 2015, so we have over 800 episodes in the archives that are not in the main podcast feed. So you can get your fill of birth stories. And you'll also get access to our private Facebook group for Patreon members, which is a great place to honestly just to search the past posts to get answers to questions, but then of course to ask new questions, find community. It's a really, really great supportive group of people. So I highly recommend joining that. We would love to have you there. We also do monthly Zoom calls with our Patreon supporters, and you get an opportunity to enter your birth story via a different submission form than everyone else uses, and we choose 2 Patreon members each month to share their birth stories. So that is again at patreon.com/birthhour. Today's birth story guest is Aubrey, and she's going to be sharing her twins' birth story. She had die twins and an induction at 37 weeks and 4 days. It was a vaginal delivery, and twin B ended up being breech. So she talks about just kind of finding the right care provider for her and what that looked like, as well as her postpartum experience when some unexpected things came up right after getting the twins home. She does kind of read her story at the beginning, but then we get into more of a discussion towards the end. Today's episode is brought to you by Air Doctor. Americans spend an average of 90% of their time indoors, but did you know that indoor air can be up to 100 times more polluted than outdoor air? You can breathe easy with Air Doctor, the award-winning air purifier that eliminates 99.99% of dangerous contaminants like allergens, viruses, smoke, gases, mold spores, and more. Air Doctor was voted Best Air Purifier by Newsweek, so it's no surprise that 98% of Air Doctor customers agree their home's air feels cleaner, safer, and healthier. Unlike other purifiers, Air Doctor captures invisible particles 100 times smaller than standard HEPA filters. We have air purifiers in our bedroom as well as the kids' bedrooms, and everyone has been sleeping better. I love how quiet the Air Doctor is. It's like the perfect amount of white noise. I would absolutely splurge on this for a nursery for baby. Like, get the cheap crib from IKEA and put your money towards this so that your baby has clean air in their nursery. We also have one in our living room, and I've noticed a huge difference after cooking and things like that. It just really clears the room really quickly. Head to airdoctorpro.com and use the promo code BIRTHHOUR to get up to $300 off today. Air Doctor comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee plus a 3-year warranty, which is an $84 value for free. You can get this exclusive podcast-only offer now at airdoctorpro.com, airdoctorpro.com, using the promo code BIRTHHOUR. All right, let's hear from Aubrey. Hi, Aubrey. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Hi, Bryn.
Before we get to your birth story, can you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Yes, my name's Aubrey, and I'm married to my high school sweetheart. We have 3 little girls, and we live just outside of Fort Worth, Texas. And I stay at home with the girls and run like a micro sourdough bakery.
Very cool. All right. Well, I know we're going to hear your more recent birth story. So let's start with getting pregnant, finding out you're pregnant, wherever you want to start.
Yeah, so we tried for a few months, like in between, to get pregnant with the twins. And so I had been talking to my midwife. That's who I used with my first pregnancy. And so she kind of knew we were trying. So after I found out I was pregnant, she ended up like testing my HCG, which I did not do with my first pregnancy, at like 6 weeks. And I remember it being like really high. And I remember Googling, could this mean a twin pregnancy? And, it's like it could, but also you could just be someone with high HCG. And I didn't obviously test with my first pregnancy. So I was like, there's no way it's twins. I'm just going to put that in the back of my mind and, get rid of it. And went in at 8 weeks. The baby was doing good. That's all we saw was one baby, one heartbeat. And we had planned like my real appointment at 10 weeks with my husband. And so I went in at 10 weeks, and I remember laying there and she had it on the baby, and she slowly moved the little monitor thing, and the second baby appeared. And I could see it, and my husband I don't think he could really tell what was going on. And my midwife looked at us and was like, oh my gosh, you're having twins. And it was kind of a surreal moment. We genuinely were not anticipating it. And so my midwife gave us time. She was like, we'll come back, in 4 weeks and discuss your options. She was like, we're not going to talk about it right now. Y'all need time to process. And so I was like, okay, sounds good. I honestly was just in pure shock. And so when we went back to her again for the follow-up appointment, she was someone like I really trusted because of just everything that happened during my first pregnancy. And although I didn't deliver with her, we had like a really great relationship. She was there through the birth. And so she talked through all the risks that came with twins. She felt confident that she could deliver them as long as baby A was head down. So I trusted her. And so at around 24 weeks, after we had decided to continue with the midwifery care at a birth center, we had just had, our 20-week anatomy scan. And honestly, there was no issues, no concerns. Everything was going great. Both babies were in their own sacs, had their own placentas. It was overall super healthy. But my midwife started to express concerns. She was like, baby A is not head down. And although it was still early, she was worried that, they're cramped for space. Baby A might stay that way. And she was like, this could lead to a C-section. And she's like, I just want you to find a doctor just in case. And I could always come back. But honestly, it really rattled me. And I felt like there was a lack of faith, in me and my body. And so after that conversation, my confidence really started to fade in her and delivering outside the hospital. I began to question whether she was really for me and my babies. It felt like another person doubting me. And there was just fear everywhere. My older sister miscarried twins at 17 weeks. And that was laying heavy on my heart through this entire pregnancy. And then on top of that, and all the Facebook twin groups I was on, I just saw story after story of preterm labor and complications. And so there was just a lot on my mind and in my heart around the fear of twin pregnancies, even though mine was going really smoothly. And it made me feel like everything about twins was risky. It wasn't safe to trust my instincts. That was a pivotal moment for me where I lost trust, not only in my midwife, but in myself. I started to believe I didn't have a choice anymore. So I decided to find a new doctor. She was open to vaginal twin birth, even if baby B stayed breech. That gave me a little peace, but our relationship never felt personal. The visits felt quick and cold, like I was being checked off a list instead of cared for as a person. As the weeks went on, I felt more and more out of control. I was tired, emotionally and physically. The financial strain of twin pregnancy appointments and tests added pressure too. When my doctor started recommending an induction between 37 and 38 weeks, I struggled hard with that. I wanted my babies to come when they were ready. It didn't feel like my decision anymore, and I didn't feel strong enough to push back. Eventually, I agreed to be induced at 37 weeks and 4 days. It wasn't a decision made from empowerment. It was made from exhaustion. I told myself, I just need to get through this. So now, onto my labor and delivery.
Okay.
So when we arrived at the hospital, at 7 a.m. for the induction, I was pretty much not dilated. My cervix was still closed. Like the babies were just happy where they were. And for reference, my first baby was 42 weeks one day. So my body just carries them for a long time. So they started with Cytotec every 4 hours. And by 3 a.m., they switched me to Pitocin. So it had been over 12 hours at that point. I still didn't have an epidural, but before labor, I had talked to my provider about wanting to move around, and she agreed. But once things started and it became clear that wasn't going to happen, the nurses were so worried about keeping both babies on the monitors that every time I moved, they would have to come in and adjust them. Eventually, they just told me I needed to stay in bed. Not being able to move was mentally and physically exhausting. I had hoped to go as long as I possibly could without an epidural, like I did with my first, but being stuck in bed broke me down. I was crying, upset, and I felt like I was just surviving. I remember feeling like I wasn't even in my body anymore. My husband kept saying, "You've got to focus on the babies. They need you." I know he meant it to keep me grounded, and it did help, but I just felt so tired. Eventually, I decided to get the epidural so I could rest. I was still only about 4 or 5 centimeters, and even though they had started Pitocin, my contractions had slowed down. When my doctor came in 24 hours later around 7 a.m., she asked if she could break my water. I agreed. I was ready to be done. I wanted to meet my babies. Looking back, I can see how God placed each nurse in my birth for a reason. They were all different, but each one came at exactly the right time. The first nurse, she was sweet and kind, but more by the book. She got us settled in and made us feel safe starting out. The second nurse, the night nurse, she was my lifeline during my lowest moments. She told me she wished she could get me up to move around, that she believed in gravity and letting my body do the work. She saw me when I felt invisible. She gave me the kind, listening presence I needed. The last nurse, and she had a student nurse as well, they were my finale team. Calm, motherly, and exactly the energy I needed. The main nurse had several children of her own and the calmest voice. She walked in and said, "Are we ready to have these babies today?" That moment of positivity was like a light in the room. So my night nurse had prepared me for the doctor, likely breaking my water, and I appreciated that she gave me time to process and pray about it. So when the doctor came in, I was ready. Once my water broke, my contractions immediately picked up. My nurse didn't leave my side. She could tell things were moving quickly. It was close to 10 a.m. My parents and husband had just had breakfast, and my husband had stepped out to use the bathroom. Suddenly, I felt pressure. My nurse checked me, and I'll never forget it. She looked up and said, "She's crowning." And they hit the emergency button. The room filled with alarms, voices, and urgency. They were calling out my room number, sending for help, because I had to go to the OR to deliver the babies. My husband heard it in the hallway and came rushing back. And so they were handing him his scrubs. The calm, peaceful energy turned into chaos in an instant. I felt completely disconnected, like I was watching it all from above, emotionless. My body was doing the work, but my heart couldn't catch up. I remember them rushing me down the hallway and just the bright lights overhead and people, behind the nurse's desk were staring at me as I'm just laying in the bed, just okay, I'm about to have the babies. She's right there. We made it to the OR just in time. A few pushes later, baby A was born. They grabbed the monitor for baby B and realized she was Breech, but she was ready too. A few more pushes and she was here. They were only minutes apart. Both babies needed a little under an hour of observation in the NICU, but they were healthy. I had a small tear and was back in my room quickly. Our postpartum stay was calm and uneventful, which was a relief. The nurses were kind and offered to help with the baby so we could get a little rest. Both girls stayed healthy. I had hand-expressed colostrum and brought some from home. They took that well along with the little formula. My oldest had tongue and lip ties, and I'd mentioned it to the lactation consultant and pediatrician, but both said the twins looked fine. In the moment, I wasn't sure because no one noticed it with my first, but I'll go back to that later. The hospital experience wasn't transformative. It was just what it was. I was thankful for all the kind nurses, but I was ready to go home, and I really missed my oldest because it was the longest I had been away from her. So a couple days later, we had our first pediatrician appointment. We live about an hour away, and it was in September in Texas, hot and humid. We had just gotten our oldest back, and we're excited to start life as a family of 5. We had one sweet day together before the appointment. I sat back in the back seat with the babies, making sure bottles and pumping were on schedule. The babies wearing light-footed pajamas with a blanket draped over them, no hats. They were just under 6 pounds, and we didn't realize how sensitive they'd be to temperature. The pediatrician was kind, and this was a new pediatrician, but noticed their temps were a little low. She wasn't alarmed, but was cautious. Because of our distance from the Fort Worth area, she suggested to go to the Children's Hospital just in case. We didn't know any better. We wanted to keep them safe, so we went. When we got there, it was terrifying. They put us in a special section away from the sick kids. Since our babies were newborns, they placed them in warmers. They warmed up quickly. They ate, stayed bundled, and maintained their temps. But the doctors were used to seeing the worst case scenarios. They began running test after test, blood work, x-rays, even spinal taps. It was unnecessary and heartbreaking. They were perfectly healthy babies who had just gotten too cold in the car. They were admitted to the respiratory floor for 3 days because truthfully they didn't know where to put them because all the tests were coming back normal. The babies were placed in incubators, and we weren't even allowed to hold them for the first 24 hours. It was unbearable. My heart broke for every parent who has to experience that kind of separation. That was some of the hardest and longest days of my life. Obviously my oldest was away from us again, and that was really heartbreaking, and I was really emotional through the entire experience. And there was one nurse, an angel, who became our advocate. She was the baby's biggest cheerleader. I remember her saying, she'd come in and she'd be like, "Now, Miss Athena, what are you doing?" And I still call Athena, I'll say Miss Athena, even to this day. They put them thankfully in the same room, but she was my twin that, like her heart rate and all that. She was just, I think she was very responsive to the energy in the room. And so when like certain people would come in, you could just feel herself rise. And that's how they are even today, which is just so crazy. But she did help us, this nurse helped us get discharged sooner. And because of all the antibiotics and interventions, the girls had some side effects, but we got through it. So like after we left this hospital, we went home. We would feed the babies, throughout the day and at night. But it would take almost 30 minutes to an hour to drink a bottle. And I wasn't really latching them a lot because with my first, I experienced like a lot of trauma during the breastfeeding experience. And that was something I really, really wanted to do for my twins. But I also knew that I couldn't put myself through the same trauma that I did with her just to make it work. And so I knew that there was a risk of them potentially having the tongue and lip ties as well. And so this time I was a lot more cautious to make sure that I had a lactation consultant and I took the time that I needed to get the babies ready for the releases and everything if they needed them. And so we took them in at 8 weeks and they both had tongue, lip, and cheek ties, which they didn't even notice at the hospital. And so once we got those revised, it all went a lot smoother. It definitely took relearning on their part, but they were able to drink a bottle so much quicker. And eventually I was able to tandem nurse both of them. That took a while and a lot of help from my lactation consultant and a lot of patience from me and the babies, but we were able to get it to work. And I was even able to nurse them for over a year. They still had bottles, but I was still able to nurse them, which was such a win for me. And that was a healing experience based off everything I experienced the first time.
Yeah.
But my birth as a whole was very traumatic for me. And I felt very, like I said, just not there. I just was going through the motions. I was doing what was best for everyone else. And I think that part was really hard for me. And I think just all of the fear of everything just ate at me a lot more than I realized. And I didn't really realize it until afterwards. And it was after I'd had them that I realized, man, I wasn't the same Aubrey that I had been before. I literally lost myself during the pregnancy and then obviously the birth. So when I look back, I can see how God was weaving people into our story. And I think sharing this today has really helped me see all of that in it.
That's good. I'm glad. And do you feel like as far as processing everything and feeling better, it was just time, or did you find anything else that was helpful?
I think it was mostly time. I shared my birth with a lot of people. I talked a lot about it, but I think you're just so in the emotions of it all that it literally wasn't until the last few weeks that I really was able to see things from a different perspective, which I am just now a little bit over a year postpartum. But yeah, when I was able to like really look back, and because like with my midwife, that was a very, very hard decision for me. And I wrote about it, but like I felt so lost. I felt like it wasn't my choice anymore when she was like, maybe you need to go find someone else. And she had the best intentions. Like, I know her heart was in the right place, but for me and everything I was dealing with internally, her saying that was just like, it literally just broke my back. Like, it literally just took everything away from me. And I didn't realize that until, because at first I would just kind of harbored a lot of feelings towards her about like, why would you even scare me like that? But it's like, I don't think that was her intention. Like, I think she was really trying to warn me that could happen.
Yeah.
Baby A flipped head down like by 30 weeks. So I was within completely normal range. And I think that's why I was so like, why did you scare me, at 24 weeks? Like, you could have waited a little longer, but she didn't know. She was doing what she thought was best as a provider, and she was looking out for me. And I think I didn't realize that until like recently. So that was kind of a big thing for me, was like to kind of release those emotions. And then during the birth itself, I mean, there's only so much I can do, during a birth, and especially when you're put in that specific situation. I mean, it was hard for them to find baby A. And so like, my doctor was trying to help me get up, but I would sit in the chair. They couldn't find baby A. I would walk around. They couldn't find baby A. And so they're like, well, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to lay in a bed. And I'm like, I had a hard time understanding how that was the option. Like, that is my only choice in this matter, is to just lay here, because you can't do anything. I can't help the baby move. And with my first birth, although I was in the hospital, although I was induced, I was still able to do everything. I was still able to move around. I was still able to bounce on the ball. I was able to literally do my birth as I would want to. So this time it just felt like all of that was stripped from me when they were like, no, you have to stay in bed. And the thing was, I voiced that concern to her prior, and I just felt like she was just like, well, that's all I can do for you, And so that part, it was really hard. And, also like, she never asked, how are you going to make it postpartum? Do you have the help lined up with me having twins and a toddler? And I just felt like she never even acknowledged like my feelings around everything. It was very much like, your baby's healthy, you're healthy, every appointment, like physically. So we're checking that box, and you can go do the NST or whatever else that I had to do every appointment pretty much. But overall, the actual twin pregnancy was very, very healthy. I mean, there was nothing that was like scary. There was nothing that they were like, oh, you're at risk. We're worried about a baby. Like, there was never any actual concerns for the babies themselves or me, myself. I think it was just all of the fears. And I felt like lack of support from people is where I was really struggling. And so, like I said, like really talking about it and thinking about it has really helped me be like, okay. And, obviously it helps me know what I want to do different next time. But I just like want anyone to know that you can find that support. And even if you don't have the energy, like, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because like, obviously I didn't have that, and my babies came out healthy. And my first, she had to have NICU stay right after delivery. And these babies, they didn't. Like, they were able to come to our room, and they were so healthy. And I just felt like that part was really good. But then we had the hospital stay, a little bit later on. And that was really, really hard for me emotionally. And especially with that visit. And this is, I just want to say, like, one of the hardest parts was, it's like, I didn't feel seen, throughout my pregnancy a whole lot. And then I gave birth, and the nurses were great in the postpartum floor. They asked how you're doing. We went to this children's hospital. And I'm like, I'm a few days postpartum. I'm still bleeding. I'm still having to wear the diapers and do all the things. And I showed up, I had nothing. I didn't even have a pad to change into. And I remember just sitting there, crying and thinking, like, I feel so forgotten right now.
Yeah.
Not only are they just doing everything they are to my babies right now, but like, I'm over here, a newly postpartum mom who can't even take care of myself.
Yeah.
So I felt like I couldn't take care of them or myself. And that part, I think, was really, really hard for me. And those were, seriously some of the hardest days. And, we felt so alone and just so lost. And sometimes I'm like, why did we even have to go through that? But, we don't always know. We don't always have a reason. And sometimes we just have to. But like, my heart just goes out to any other mom that has to experience that.
Yeah.
And like, I want, everyone to know that you're not alone in that. Like, there are people that see you. I mean, they would come and they would tell me news, and, I'm newly postpartum. So I just start bawling, just tears streaming down my face. And they couldn't even make eye contact with me anymore. They don't treat you like you're like a newly postpartum, mom who is just having a hard time. They're just like, well, she's another crying mom. It's just, I think all of that was just really, really hard for me.
Yeah.
And so that was just like a big thing that I wanted to talk about, because I just want everyone to know that, like, no matter how it all goes, I think we're all just like showing up. We're all showing up. We're all doing our best, through everything that we're going through. Mm-hmm. And, our kids, they just see us as however we are, and they just love us however we are.
Yeah.
And that is what matters.
Yeah.
Not all of the other things that go on, Mm-hmm. And it's important to process through everything that you go through and talk to people and reach out and get the help that you need. But it's just can be really hard sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I wish, like you said, like there would be more compassion for a mom who just gave birth, like physically recovering, emotionally, hormonal drops are insane. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I remember even just having to go get like a tongue tie done like a few days after giving birth. And like, there was no comfortable place to sit. There was no like nursing pillow, even though they wanted you to nurse right after it was done. I'm like, how have y'all not thought through these things? Obviously these are new babies. So there's also new mothers.
They literally sent us to the respiratory floor, which we didn't even find that out until later on.
Yeah.
So we were on the respiratory floor with kids who had RSV and pneumonia with 2 brand new babies. And so all of the nurses, on the floor, they looked at their oxygen levels as if that defined everything. Mm-hmm. Well, the one angel nurse we had, she had worked in the NICU floor before. And so she knew, with them being, brand new babies, that their oxygen level could drop sometimes, because they're still figuring out how to breathe outside of the womb. I mean, they were just born, and they were just under 6 pounds. So they weren't super small. I mean, that's still a healthy weight, but they looked at them like, well, they're underweight and they were born early. So they would call them preemies. And I'm like, they're not preemies. Like, they were born right before 38 weeks. So that made me feel like they were attacking me as a mother, because I knew that I chose that. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, you're making me sound like my choices were not right, because now we're here. So we had a really bad experience with a night nurse, and the oxygen in Athena would drop and they would put her on oxygen. And it all was because they put them in incubators, which they should have never been put in. And so it was just like it was just like a series of events that never should have happened. Yeah. That just led to one thing after the next. And so when this nurse, our angel nurse, like, we had her 2 days in a row, she was the one that told the doctor, like, Athena is doing great. She hasn't been on oxygen. He's like, but what if? And I'm like, we're existing in this what if world, but we're not looking at the baby. Like, let's pause and look at the baby. Does the baby look healthy? She looks very healthy. Every number y'all have tested, y'all have ran every single test possible, has came back normal. And it finally took, like, I don't think we got discharged till like right around 7 p.m. on the final day. We're holding on to be like, please let us like get out of here, because we were worried we'd have another night nurse that would put them on oxygen. Like, we were worried it was just going to be the cycle. Yeah. And those nurses, like, I remember she came in and she had just started working, and she's like, just so you know, she might have to be on oxygen because her levels have been dropping some. And she never even looked at the baby, never looked at her, never like went over and like touched her. She literally just like looked at the screen and looked at us. And I was like, you're not even looking at my baby as if she means anything. Mm-hmm. And our angel nurse would like talk to her, Miss Athena, stop goofing around. And her oxygen would jump straight back up. And so that's where it was like, this is normal. for it to kind of dip like that, and it didn't sustain very long. But I think being on the respiratory floor really did not help with that, and just not having nurses that had adequate care for like smaller babies and newer babies. And so of course for me, being a newly postpartum mom, they just didn't have any recognition for that either.
Yeah.
I mean, I had to ask for a pump, and they were like, "Oh, you need a pump?" I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to like feed my babies here. Like, I'm so confused as to why we're just so unaware, and they probably were just going through the motions of their jobs and stuff. But I think, us as moms who care so deeply and love our kids so much, it just can be really hard when we're in a position like that where we're so vulnerable and we're having to get all of the help, and they aren't helping us at all, and treating us like we really play a vital role. Mm-hmm. It was really, really hard just going through that. But I do think it has really softened me a lot towards other moms who have to go through that. It's made me more empathetic, and it's given me just like a different level of like strength in myself, which I think is really important. And so that's like what I try to focus on despite everything that had happened. And, my first had a NICU stay as well. And so that was really hard for us. And we had an angel nurse in that situation as well that was like, I think they can go. And my first she was over 8 pounds. She was an 8 pound, like 6 ounces. And she was a big baby. And that's why we didn't think about, bundling up the twins as much, because she was born in January and was completely fine. We just didn't have to worry about her temperature as much, but her temperature regulation is a lot different at that size than they are when they're little. And they're 37 weeks, which is another thing. So I just think there's all these, like, we can know everything in the world. Like, I know so much, there's still things we don't know, And I think that was really hard for me as well to come to terms to be like, man, like I felt like I failed again as a mom. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, it's my fault that I didn't make sure they had hats and make sure they were bundled and did all that I could. But I also did have a conversation with the pediatrician after that hospital stay. And I told her, I said, I think next time, because they were just a little bit cold. Like, they weren't like super cold. Like, she literally was like, well, if they could just come up a little bit more, I wouldn't be worried. And I'm like, that's not that much, Mm-hmm. And so I had the conversation with her, and I said, next time you really need to talk to the parents. Like, if it's only a little bit, like if it's not that big of a concern, maybe you should talk to the parents a little bit more and like ask more questions, because that was not a just in case, and I think that was part of my story with both my midwife and the pediatrician it was like, well, just in case. And I'm like, we're all like, just in case, like sometimes that we're completely missing the point. Because with the situation with my midwife, like my babies were perfectly fine. Baby A went head down. I didn't need that just in case. And same with the twins being in the hospital. And so it's just, I think that part can be really hard to find the discernment that we need to handle those situations, to be like, what is the right answer? Because we don't really know, and you want to lean into your provider and trust them. And I think that's what can make it really challenging, being in these experiences, especially when you want to do everything you can to protect your babies,
Yeah, definitely. Well, those are some great words of wisdom there at the end. Did you have any specific resources you want to share at all?
I didn't put any specific resources like books or anything. I think there's a lot of, great books out there, obviously listening to podcasts and learning what you can about births. I've read some good ones. I've read some that I feel like weren't my favorite. And so I just feel like you just find the books that work best for you. So I just don't really have any specific recommendations.
Okay.
But I just would recommend that with like any sort of tongue and lip ties, please find a lactation consultant that is familiar with tongue and lip ties. And then also, see a pediatrician, like do what you can, because that was one of the hardest things with my first, was just really excruciating, painful breastfeeding. Mm-hmm. And we found out, after like almost a week of me breastfeeding her, that she wasn't gaining enough weight. And I would nurse her for an hour and she'd still be hungry. And it was exhausting for me, exhausting for her. I felt like I wasn't doing enough, but I didn't have, the resource. I didn't know what steps to take. And so I ended up rushing her into a pediatrician, getting her revised. And I'm like, why is it not better? Like, why is she not nursing better? And then I finally found a lactation consultant, but I felt like I went about it not quite the best way. And then she also like was delayed in crawling, and like her walking was fine. She was delayed, like she never crawled until she was 18 months old. And I do think it's a lot of just like the tightness, you know, because of the fascia running through the body. And I never did any sort of like chiropractic care, or I forget what the other one's called, but like I just never got any body work on her. Mm-hmm. And so with the twins, I did make sure, I only went like maybe 3 times, but I got it like once before their procedure and then like a few times after. And I just think it made like the world of difference in just, you know, their body, because I mean, they had all 4 ties, which is a lot of tightness. Mm-hmm. So I do think they needed, and even my first, which she had the tongue and lip, definitely still needed like the chiropractic care. So I would just recommend, if you're experiencing any of that, to just try to find, you know, the providers you need. And obviously you've been through that too. So, you know, it's, they say like once you have it with your first, there's a good chance you can continue having it with each baby. And so I think that's been kind of like a big thing for me, is like, well, I might have to go through this again. And so using that knowledge that I've learned to use that going forward to help, because the twins they've crawled on, like everything has happened with them normally developmentally with, you know, crawling and everything. And I think a lot of it is just because they needed some of that releasing through the chiropractic care and everything that they were given. And so I do think it makes a big difference. And like I said, we only were able to afford like 3 or 4 times, because I know it's expensive, but that 3 or 4 times makes a big difference. You know, I mean, even though they tell you to keep coming, but like we couldn't afford it, and it worked out just fine. So I'm just very grateful for that. And my lactation consultant was absolutely amazing this time around.
Good. So
kind with the twins. And it just made for a much better experience with that, despite, you know, everything that happened around birth and all of that. So I'm very grateful for that.
Good. Awesome. All right. Well, then what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. Aubrey S. Gill is my handle. And on Facebook, my name is Aubrey Cates, but I don't really know if there's an actual handle for Facebook. But you can definitely find me on Instagram and message me that way if you have any questions.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for sharing, Aubrey.
Thank you, Bryn.
Thank you so much again to Aubrey for sharing her story with us, and to Air Doctor for sponsoring this episode. Remember to use the coupon code BIRTHHOUR at airdoctorpro.com to get up to $300 off today. I will link to that as well as other things from this episode on her show notes page, which you can find by going to thebirthhour.com and searching for Aubrey's name. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.